Good day, everyone. So this is our mini lecture for session 6.1, and it's about strategic control and about measuring success. I want to stress that this is a good topic for you to look at when you're completing your assignment, because in your assignment, and I'll show you now, there is a section in the assignment that you need to complete about measuring the success of your assigned business or your client firm. As you can see here, this is the assignment description document, which shows us that the group written report has a certain format we need to complete, and this is the format that I'm looking at. So if we look at section 9, critique of current strategy, what this means is you're supposed to research on what your client firm is doing at the moment, the strategies that it is performing, and try to criticize whether this strategy is a good strategy or not a very good strategy. And you need to have some criteria to decide whether you think that's a good strategy or not, or set of strategies are correct or not. And if you think that they're not quite correct, you need to basically explain why you think they're not right. Okay, and then of course, leading from that, section 10, your recommended strategy therefore is to talk about ways to enter the automotive industry, or the automobile industry rather, as a strategic alternative for your client firm. Okay, so let's go back to our slide here. So again, we'll talk about basically how do you criticize and how do you evaluate whether the strategies are of your client firm are any good or not. So perhaps I'll throw the question at you first before I start our lecture, our formal lecture, about why we think we can measure, or how we can measure the success of a strategy. So I'll pause the video now and let's have a discussion. Or if you're watching this on your own, try to think about, list it down on a piece of paper. What do you think are the ways I can measure the success of a firm or the firm's strategy? Okay, we are back. Now, I would expect many students would probably say, well, the way we measure success is to take a look at profit. If our firm's profit is increasing, then the strategy must be successful. But I think that's a bit simplistic. In other words, we have to think of other things to look at before we can determine if that's in fact a successful strategy. One way to look at it is this diagram here. And what this diagram is really saying, and this time we'll divide it vertically, and we see failure on the right side and success on the left side. So we'll see that even if you're failing, but you're understanding the reasons why you're failing, then at least there's a chance you can improve and turn around the firm. But if you are failing and you don't understand, that is resulting in a rapid decline. Then on the left side, you might be successful, but you're taking the success for granted. You don't understand, why is it? What were the things that you did which made you successful? And if you take that for granted, you will result in what we call a fadeaway. So you can't repeat what you've done because you don't understand exactly what you did. But if you understand what's going on, you understand what you've done correctly, then you can sustain this strategy. You can come up with similar strategies that have worked before in the past. Okay, so really valuable diagram. I know it's a bit confusing at times, but I think the main point is that we need to understand the impacts of our strategies. And even if they're a failure, let's learn from it. Okay, so next slide here is talking about the famous disparity between efficiency and effectiveness. And this is a common question we've asked our students, even from the first year of your stay here at CIC when you've taken up management principles. And there is a difference between being efficient and being effective. So I'm going to pause this video now for you to discuss or to write down on your own and reflect on whether there is a difference between efficiency and effectiveness, and try to think of examples of what is being efficient versus what is being effective. Okay, so I hope your discussion or your reflection has shown you that there is that difference between being effective and being efficient. I just wanted to show you, or not show you, but I've explained to you one example of being effective and being efficient. As we know, being effective really means that you're choosing the right strategy, you're choosing the right direction to go for your firm. And hopefully you're achieving that strategy, and therefore you're being effective. But being efficient, on the other hand, is being able to conduct that strategy, but in a very cost-effective way. You're spending less resources in order to achieve that strategy or that objective. So the difference in that, and I will illustrate with the airline, not airline, but rather the airplane wars. So there are two major manufacturers and marketers of airplanes, or what do you call this? Airplanes for airlines, and that is Boeing, and the other is Airbus. So Boeing is an American company, and Airbus is a European company. So when there was a point in their lives, in their history, where they had to come up with a strategy on what next to build. Okay, what kind of airplane should we make? Boeing decided to come up with the 787 Dreamliner. And their strategy was, let's build an airplane that is very efficient. It consumes less fuel, because our forecast is that airlines will want an airplane that consumes less fuel, is more efficient to produce, efficient to fly, and therefore that will be the choice of airlines. It was built out of very space-age material. It was what they call composite materials or carbon fiber materials. They're very strong and very light, as opposed to the traditional airplane, which was made out from aluminum mostly, or metal. On the other hand, Airbus decided to go another route, and their route was, let's build the biggest airplane in the world. Okay, so that was the A380, and that could accommodate something like 400 to 500 people, depending on the configuration. And their strategy was that airlines would want to buy this huge airplane and save money by cramming more people into this airplane. And unfortunately for Airbus, and fortunately for Boeing, the effective strategy, or the right strategy to choose, belonged to Boeing. They chose the right way, which was to build a very efficient airline, and more airlines actually chose to buy the 787. So you could argue that they were effective. Now, were they efficient? That's another story. Years later, they came up with a new airline called the 737 MAX. And if you're following your business history, that was a complete disaster. In a span of about 2 or 3 years, they had two devastating crashes, which killed everyone on board. And this was attributed to a design error in the 737 MAX, something to do with their ironically, their safety systems caused the airplane to actually crash. So they weren't really efficient. They weren't very good at implementing their strategy. They chose the right strategy, but again, they weren't very efficient in doing it. So I would argue that that is being effective, choosing the right strategy for Boeing. But they weren't efficient. They didn't implement it properly. They had design errors, which is costing them millions and millions of dollars, because that 737 had to be grounded and it took a while. It's only now that it's beginning to fly again. And Boeing took a multi-billion-dollar hit, which is actually, they're surviving, and they people believe that they will survive this crisis of theirs, but they were hit very hard with it. Now, the worst, of course, is if you choose the wrong strategy, and while you're implementing that strategy, you're spending so much money, you're very wasteful, and that would be really a real collapse. Now, on Airbus, they weren't very effective. They chose the wrong strategy initially with the 380, but it wasn't a complete disaster. They're no longer making this airline, the 380, but they survived. They were efficient in making this airplane, and basically they of course caught up. They built their own carbon fiber airplane, and there's a lot of new ideas on the line, and you could argue that they survived a lot better than Boeing currently. They're surviving. They're in a better state right now. Of course, the holy grail is to find effectively find a good strategy that is effective, but at the same time implement it properly or be efficient. Okay, so that would lead to growth and prosperity. Okay, some very good authors that have given us some quotations here, and you'll be surprised that some of these quotations don't necessarily agree with each other, but these are points of views. Let's try to discuss them one at a time. So the first is by Peter Drucker, who is a known management guru, and he said that if you can measure it, then you can manage it. I think what he's really saying is, if you're trying to manage something, you really need to measure it, because if you don't measure it, you cannot control it, right? So how do you know whether you're achieving your objective if you have no way of measuring things? So that's his main point there. Another is attributed to Albert Einstein, who said, "Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted." So the English language is indeed a very funny language, as some of you students are probably, what is he saying? Let me try to explain. I think what Mr. Einstein was saying was basically, there's a lot of things that are important in life. In business, there's a lot of things that are important, and unfortunately, not all of them can be measured. Right? So, the admiration of people, how well you're serving your community, is not always measured in terms of your sales or in terms of your profit. Imagine if you're a pharmaceutical company and you're saving lives. How much is a life worth? Is it, can you really count the value of life and put that as a number? So, again, not everything that can be counted counts. So you might be measuring things, but it doesn't really matter, right? I get a great example of this is with students. And students often ask me, how many words is the assignment? 5,000 words, 3,000 words. They're very, very fixated on the number of words in the assignment. But in actuality, it's not that important. The more important and where I will be basing your grade is basically the quality of your work, not how long or how short your work is. So if you're able to achieve all the requirements of that assignment, then you will get a very good grade, regardless of how many words you put in there. The number of words are indicated there, so you just have an indication just of more or less just how much to mention in your assignment. But it's not the way I will grade you. Okay, so not everything that can be counted counts. Okay, the last quotation here is from Jack Welch. Jack Welch is the former CEO of GE. He's a legendary manager. They called him Jack the Ripper because he would cut down the divisions of GE and make it more efficient. So the three most important things you need to measure in business are customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and cash flow. So it really he likes to simplify things, and I really like that, because at the end of the day, if you satisfy your customer, then profits will follow. And of course, you can't just have you can't attain sustainable growth and sustainable profit unless your employees are happy doing work for your company. If they're not, then eventually they'll leave you, your talent will leave you, and your company will lack the talent needed to sustain your growth. So, and then lastly, it's the cash flow, which is the financial aspect of it. So, knowing, by the way, he didn't say profit, he said cash flow. And there's a bit of a difference, right? You could have a lot of profit, but no money coming in. So if people have bought your product but have not paid you for your product, then your profit might be looking very good, but there's no money coming in. So that's a basic difference between cash flow and profit. Okay, so let's go on. Model which helps us understand, okay, how do we know when we're successful or not? And our textbook looks at three things. Firstly, of course, it's the money aspect or the financial results. And there are other market-driven quantitative measures that we could use, such as market share. And if you remember, market share is looking at the entire industry or market and figuring out how much of that industry we own, and how much of our sales represents the entire market. So the higher that is, of course, the better it is. All right, so another way of looking at it is looking at our stakeholders. And we mentioned this a lot earlier in previous lessons about the stakeholder perspective. And stakeholders are those that are impacted by our firm. And what we're saying in this aspect is, we're not only looking at our shareholders who own the company, but we're also looking at things like our employees, the community and society that we serve. Trying to make sure that we don't ignore any of these stakeholders would be one way of achieving a success. The textbook mentions the third and last is admiration. So, for example, the annual reviews carried out by Fortune and Management Today, for example, these are magazines, prestigious magazines, which have a look at companies and look at just how well they've been operating. But I'm not necessarily a great believer in admiration. One example of this is Theranos. We discussed this earlier in one of our lectures. Theranos is a pharmaceutical company who had a very persuasive and very dynamic leader in Elizabeth Holmes. And in fact, she was so persuasive, and she got all these magazines to basically write about her, and the value of her company was, continued to rise through the years, and it hit $1 billion, which made it a unicorn, what they call a unicorn company. And widely admired person and widely admired company. But in a couple of years, they found out that it was all a lie. The things that she was saying she was able to invent were not actually true. And from that $1 billion, the value of her shares went down to zero. Again, I would say admiration is good, but it may not necessarily be the truth, and it may not necessarily be a great way to measure success. Now, looking at that model, we can look at our good old EVR congruence model, which looks at the environment, values, and resources. And as we used to look at this model as a way to analyze our, like our SWOT analysis. The environment represents opportunities and threats. Our resources represent our strengths and weaknesses, and our values is also part of our strengths and weaknesses. So, looking at our leadership, our organizational culture, these are all values and resources which are form part of our strengths and weaknesses. But the EVR congruences can also be used at measuring how well we're doing as a firm. Looking at the environment, we can look at things like customer satisfaction, customer retention, market share, which measures again how well we're doing versus competition. The higher our market share, that means that we are doing better versus competition, which are what we call effectiveness measures. So we know when we've achieved something, when we're doing things correctly, when we're doing the correct things, that is an effective measure, choosing the right strategy. So the values here means that, our willingness to learn, our competitiveness, customer care, culture would be part of this. These are, again, part of effectiveness measures. But then when we look at the resources, these are our actual assets, our cost control, our processes. This would be what we call efficiency measures. These are what we use to measure whether we're actually achieving the strategy with less resources. Right? So that's what efficiency is all about. Our last slide is a really famous way of determining whether we're successful or not, and that is called the balance scorecard. So the balance scorecard looks at 4 perspectives. We look at, of course, what everybody is probably agreeing with is our financial perspective. We look at our profits, our profit margins, our return on investment, how well we're reducing our expenses, etc., etc. Those are the measures we use in the financial perspective. But it doesn't stop there. We look at things like our customers. Are we increasing customer satisfaction? Are our customers loyal to us? How loyal are they to our brand? Again, example is the iPhone, one of the most admired companies, but rather Apple with the iPhone is one of the most admired companies. But I think the extraordinary thing about Apple is the fact that their customers are very, very loyal to them. So most Apple users will say that, well, if my Apple computer breaks down, I will buy another Apple, because that's how happy they are and how loyal they are to the brand. So we look at also the learning and growth of our employees and of our firm, how well we are learning from our mistakes. And we talked about that earlier. Their understanding. Are we understanding when we are failing? Are we understanding when we are successful in our strategies? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? That knowledge actually is learning and growth. So remember, we were saying that even if you're successful, you're doing well, your profits are going up, but you can't repeat it because you don't really understand how you got there. Then you can't repeat that success, and failure will eventually come along. The fourth and last perspective is the processes. How well our business is working within, how well we can replicate this efficiency, whether we have a customer relationship management system, if we have higher success rate in converting business opportunities, which means that we probably have a very good process in capitalizing on opportunities. So these are efficiency measures. Actually, internal business processes are efficiency measures. While having good customer satisfaction, financial perspective, these are effectiveness measures. Learning and growth, you could argue, is also part of efficiency measures. Now, the whole point, again, is that we don't measure our success simply by one aspect. Please, when you're doing your assignment, use any of these models. You could use the balanced scorecard and try to do some research about the company's learning and growth, their financial performance, their processes, and how well their customers are loyal to them. So those are 4 aspects. One example here is GE. Now, GE is very well known for its Six Sigma process, and that's been a source of their strength. And that is an internal business process, and one can argue in that perspective they've always been quite successful because they can use that same process every time they go into a new business. They implement that process and make it more profitable, more successful. All right, so again, have a look at each of these perspectives. You can also look at the EVR model if you like in measuring the success of the client firm in your assignment. And again, this model is simply the same as this, which is looking at financial results, stakeholder satisfaction, and admiration. Right? So whichever you decide, try to come up with a good critique of the current strategies of your client firm and try to explain why you believe it's a success or it's not a success. And then move on to the next, which is you recommend another strategy, a better strategy. And that better strategy has to involve the automobile industry. All right.